what you were just saying about how things have changed over the years. I certainly in my professional career, people went from wanting to play music to they would come in, and I would always say to them, even if they were big acts, I would get them a cup of tea and a ginger biscuit, and my first question would be, "What are your expectations?"
Yeah, yeah.
And they would say, "I want to be rich and famous." And I'd go, "And when do you want to be rich and famous?" This was
Tomorrow.
They would always say, "By next week."
Yeah.
Seriously.
Oh, I believe it.
I remember Mike Oldfield, Tubular Bells Mike Oldfield. He was about 3 or 4 albums in, and he came to see me and he said, I want to play stadiums in America. What a peculiar ambition. And I said, "And when do you want to play?" And he went, "Next week." I said, "I don't think I can deliver that for you." When you're a manager, the trick is that if the expectations are out of line with reality, you're probably going to get sacked. So you might as well sort that out straight away.
I had myself. I had a peculiar start as a drummer, because I know no aspirations of playing any musical instrument at all, and it is a musical instrument as well, by the way. Just about to, And I went to see Blackboard Jungle with 2 mates who played guitar. We came out and they said, "Oh, let's form a rock and roll group because of Rock Around the Clock."
Yeah,
And
Bill Haley.
Yeah, and I said, "Well, what do I do?" They said, "You play drums." So I did. And I was 17 then.
You got into a band back then if you had an amp.
Yes, yeah. Well, I had drumsticks.
You play if you had an amp.
I had drumsticks and a washboard, so I was all right.
Yeah. Then you had a gig. Yeah.
Yeah.
Talking of aspiration, I invented a game some years ago when watching Top of the Pops. I'd give every act a cab rating, as in minicab. That was the number of weeks from that show by which time they'd start to be a cab driver.
Oh, I made it within 2 weeks.
I'll tell you a rather sad, actually, Mo, I'll tell you a little kind of a sad story off the back of what you just said. When I was managing Scott Walker, and I have to say that in terms of commercial stuff, it was a non-starter, but as a person, he was an absolute delight. Absolute. I loved him, loved spending time with him. One day I had to, he was signed to Virgin, and we had to get something over to him, and they got a messenger bike, and it was taken over there. And the bike messenger, when he tapped on the door, of course he had his helmet on and the visor down, and Scott answered the door, and the messenger bike was Gary, the Walker Brothers drummer.
Oh!
Delivering a package.
That's amazing. Wow.
Yeah.
And that was like,
yes.
That was like, I mean, Scott was quite upset.
Yeah.
I mean, Gary didn't play on the records. That would have been Ronnie Verrill and Clem. Sorry?
I did the Lines album.
Oh, you did the Lines album, yeah.
And he was the drummer. He wasn't even interested, the drummer. He was just sat in the control room reading comics. He wasn't really interested in it.
No. Sorry, who? That? Brian?
Who's that, bro?
Who was sitting in the control room?
Who wasn't interested, Brian?
The drummer in the
Gary.
Oh, Gary. Well, he. I mean, we're getting into a completely different area, and the guys probably want to cut us off. But
it's fine.
the reason Gary was in the group was because his parents paid for the airfares for them to come over.
Oh, it's like his dad owned the PA, isn't it?
Yeah. Same idea. Because I asked Scott once. I said, "Why did you?" There was this story put out that they came to England because PJ Proby told them that the streets were paved with gold and all the rest of it. That wasn't the reason they came. The reason they came was to avoid the Vietnam draft.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah.
Their parents were desperate to get them out of America rather than see them shipped off to Vietnam. So Gary's dad, who was the only one who had any money, paid for the air tickets on condition that Gary was in the group.
The group, yeah.
And in fact, they had a drummer behind the curtain playing on live gigs, and Phil Wainman, who is known to some or most of us here.
Yeah.
Phil Wainman, one of the most popular men in music.
Yeah.
He was the guitar player in a group called the Quotations, who were their backing band.
Well, do you know, believe it or not, I told the story about the bass player leaning over and saying, yeah, you've got fucking disc brake. It was Phil Wayman was on guitar.
Yeah.
Oh, great, yes.
I couldn't remember his name. It was Phil Wayman.
Yeah, it was Phil.
It's horrible.
Yeah, yeah.
There was a bizarre Scott moment at Townhouse Studios where we're making that album, Climate Hunter, was it, I think?
Yes, that was the one that I did.
I have to say, Climate Hunter is one of my favourite albums. I absolutely love that record. And it's recently been reissued on vinyl, actually.
It is good. And he gave weird instructions to me and Pete Van Hook. We never quite knew where beat one was. It was odd. But it was very good. And one day the studio just received a batch of demos and ideas and God knows what from America. And the engineer was casually playing bits of them. And one of them must have been a spoof, I don't know. But it was a recording of a guy running down a corridor and having a very large shit and then running back down the corridor again. That's all it was. They played it really loud over the speakers. It was a treat to see this legend on the floor laughing at this.
It was Scott. The thing about Scott was everybody, when I took him on, everybody would say to me, "Oh, he's a recluse. He's this. He's not. He was one of the funniest guys."
Yeah.
We used to have nearly all of our meetings in complete darkness. we would seriously. We would sit in Kensington Hilton had a bar which had booths with curtains, and after 6 o'clock they turned the lighting down, and if you were in the booth, it was literally. If you unscrewed, I would have meetings, and Scott would unscrew the light bulb. And we would sit in total darkness. And I would be 4 feet away from him, and I couldn't see him. But I could hear this amazing speaking voice because he spoke in this incredible voice. And he would tell me things, and I would just be pissing myself. It was so funny. And he had started out as a bass player with an American group called the Rooters, who had a hit with "Let's Go." I don't know if you remember that. It was like a surfing kind of.
Yeah.
He was fascinating to me. I loved.
Good singer. Good singer.
Yeah, great singer. But he had unfortunately for him, we were talking earlier about the cabaret club circuit. After he left the Walkers and he did those solo albums for Phillips, great record. He got stuck doing the Northern Cabaret Club thing.
That's right, yeah.
Singing Jack Brel songs at Batley Variety Club on a Saturday night.
Yeah.
They're eating their chicken and chips, and Scott's singing "My Death," that funeral tango, and it killed him. He could not perform.
Yeah.
I think we've had this.
He got offered the part. Who played the lead in Chess the first time? Was it David Essex?
I don't know.
No.
It was, or it might have been Murray Head. Somebody Head. When Murray or whoever it was came out of the show, Tim Rice called me, and I don't take many collect calls, but it was Tim Rice. I answered the phone, and he wanted to know if Scott would go into Chess. And Scott was one of those artists from an era where he had made no money. I mean, he had made zero money.
Welcome to the club.
And he didn't even get PPL.
No.
And he what he did was he hired the Wigmore Hall and he went off to do voice exercises and scales and stuff. And he called me up that evening and he said, "I can't do it." And I said, "What do you mean you can't do it?" He said, "I'm not good enough." And I'm like, "Oh, for God's sake." Now, what he meant was he had got stage fright. He couldn't perform.
Yeah.
And when we did the records, I don't know whether you were there, Mo, when he was you there, Mo, when he did a vocal?
No. I wasn't.
No, because what happened was everybody was ushered out. Even Peter Walsh, who was producing it.
Oh, yeah.
They had to set the tape going, and the engineer and Peter had to leave, and they had to turn all the lights out.
Yeah.
Just when we did the tracks, we had no idea what the song was. We never.
No, I know you didn't. I know you didn't. He didn't know what the song was when you were.
God, it was hard.
Yeah.